Is there anything worse than creating a new offer and sharing it with the world and only hearing crickets? Like, I get it. It is honestly the most disheartening thing that can happen to you as an entrepreneur when people aren't excited to hit the buy now button. You know your business changes lives, so why don't they? You need to learn how to turn your presentations into profit machines. My guest today is amazing at helping you understand how to sell with confidence. Colin Boyd is not a stranger to the Gold Digger podcast. He is an international speaker, a trainer, and a coach. He has been running his speaking business since 2017, and my favorite thing about him is that he is obsessed with helping coaches and entrepreneurs and course creators sell from stages in a non-pushy and in a non-sleazy way, whether it's through social media, live webinars, a networking event, or anywhere else you can talk about your business. He keynotes at conferences around the world on topics such as persuasive communication and selling ideas. And last year he came on the podcast and taught us his conversion story formula. And you guys loved it so much. I was so excited to invite him to come back on the show. Colin's Zone of Genius is helping people turn every presentation into a money-making machine, whether you're posting on social media, speaking at an event, hosting a webinar, or going live on Instagram. To learn more about what Colin is teaching, go to jennakutcher.com/stage. He has an upcoming free class all about how to sell from a stage, no matter what stage it is. That's jennakutcher.com/stage to save your seat for Colin's upcoming class. Now, in the meantime, you are going to hear Colin's best tips for selling without being salesy or slimy, the same advice he gives to some of the biggest names in the world to design presentations that convert into paying clients. I cannot wait for you to hear these tactics from Colin. So welcome on back, Colin, to the Gold Digger podcast. Okay, Colin, you and I both know that there are people listening to this episode who are skeptical of this conversation because they are thinking, I do not have a quote stage to sell on. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of our conversation today, can you help us understand what you mean when you say a stage? And give us some examples of places entrepreneurs are selling from, including a stage, even metaphorically.
Yeah. So for me, a stage is any space where your audience can engage with you in both a visual and an auditory experience. So those two modalities combined together is a stage. So for example, for me, there's two contexts. There are virtual stages. So a virtual stage is a webinar where you're doing a presentation, you're engaging with the audience, asking questions, all that sort of stuff. A video could be, so if you're running an evergreen webinar, that for me is a virtual stage. Virtual events, which have become huge, obviously, over the last couple of years. We run them all the time. And then there's in-person stages, which is like a keynote at a conference or a workshop or some sort of in-person summit. So for me, they are the contexts. Now, there are some sub-stages, which could be like a podcast in a sense, like that's kind of a stage. But I would say for me, if we go from the pure sense, my specialization of the conversation I want to have today is very much around if you're running a webinar, any sort of presentation, like it's not for absolutely everyone. I actually think that there's definitely something within people's hearts where they feel like, I really want to present. I want to bring my message to the world, and I want to do, it could even be a live stream, but it's anywhere where you're presenting your ideas and people can visually experience you and verbally engage with you. That for me is a stage. So that kind of sets some context. So if anyone wants to use that type of stage, that's what this conversation is going to be about.
Okay, I am here for that because even I'm like, I don't really speak on a lot of stages. So like, what does this mean? So I do have a lot of virtual stages. So
Yeah.
I am in, buckle up. Okay, so one of the things that I would love to talk about is thinking about the key elements of like taking something that's just a presentation and turning it into a moneymaker, like a money-making machine even. So what strategies or techniques do you recommend for someone who's already going to be presenting, but to kind of add a little bit of strategy that can really drive some results for them?
First off, what I want people to realize is that they only need one high converting presentation to scale their online course to the moon and back. They only need one. And I see this happen over and over and over again. In fact, I just got off a conversation with one of my students. Her name's Lindsay. She's like a Midwest town mum. She's got a young son who's actually got disabilities. And she said to me, she was like, Colin, I don't have much time. And she said, but I followed this process, which we'll go through today, in building a high converting presentation. And she said she delivers this presentation. It's the same presentation. She delivers it once a week. And she went from doing like a couple of $1,000s a month to, she said she's doing over $30,000 a month now, working part-time in her business, doing this same presentation over and over again. Now she finds new audiences, I get that, but she's like, Colin, it's the same presentation. I didn't believe that I could actually just do the same one. So just to set the scene for everyone, because sometimes people get overwhelmed. They're like, oh my gosh, I've got to create new presentations all the time. You don't. And I know even for you, Jenna, we've had many conversations about your webinars and things like that. Tell me if I'm wrong. They're probably pretty similar presentations every single time related to the one product, right?
Totally. I mean, we literally do the presentation once a year, and it's an iteration of the last version of it, just with updated stories and stats and data.
Yes. And so this is what's cool as a foundation for people before they get overwhelmed, is to realize you just need one great presentation, right? That's the mountain we need to climb. So the question is, how do we take a regular presentation and turn it into a money-making machine? Well, I think everything starts with the offer. So when you think about a presentation that sells, as opposed to a presentation where you're just generally teaching content, the first thing you must do is you go to your offer. And the question I like to ask is, what are the things that the audience must believe about the offer and about even the context of what you're teaching in order for them to say, yes, this is the right next step for me? So when you're designing your presentation, the mistake that people make is they go into their course for their content. So they go, okay, I'm going to run a webinar. I've got this webinar coming up. It's going to be 60 minutes or 90 minutes. And they go, oh, what's the coolest stuff that I can teach from my course in this webinar? And if the audience really likes it, then they're going to, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I just got this for free. Imagine what I get when I pay. Does that make sense? Like this is
Totally.
This is one way of thinking. Now, the problem with that way of thinking is that it leads to a lot of overwhelm. And because what happens is if you give too many steps and practical actions in a training, the problem is that the audience is not yet committed to the outcome. And so what happens is the audience hears all of this cool content and you give them all the how-to, all the practical things, and the audience just feels really overwhelmed. And then this is what they say at the end. They say, Colin, Mike, Jenna, whatever your name is, they say, this is so good. Just give me 6 months to get through every single thing that you've given me in the last hour. And then I'll come back and I'll consider your offer at the end. And so the problem with this is that it's information-based content as opposed to decision-based content. And so decision-based content is where you create content where it's designed to move the audience to a greater level of commitment to the offer, but even to themselves, to realize that they need to make a big shift in their life to see a transformation. And so one of the big shifts is going from just teaching content and then whacking an offer on the end of it to going, the offer is the beginning, and working back and going, what is the content I need to put in place where the audience by the end goes, this offer aligns directly with what we've been going through this whole presentation. And it just makes total sense. And I love you, the presenter. I love the content. Like, let's go. And that's a totally different mindset.
Oh my gosh. Colin, you were like living in my brain rent free. Last week, I was watching a friend of mine's webinar. It was like her first webinar after having a kid, and she's getting back on the saddle. And I literally sent her like a 10-minute long voice message after, because she did ask for feedback.
Right.
And I was like, you gave so much stuff that like people need to take action on before they can decide. And like, it was great content, but like, again, and I literally was saying what you were just saying, because I think Everyone wants to like do the big wow factor, but I love what you're saying where it's like they haven't bought into the commitment yet. They have to understand the what and the why before they even approach the how. And so I think that that's so powerful because we as creators get so excited about like the features and the
Yeah.
bells and the whistles, and it's like we haven't even taken a minute to like make sure our audience wants those features or cares about those features or is willing to invest in those features. So I love it.
Yeah. And when you think about it, it's if you give too much overwhelm, too much actions, too many steps at the front end, what happens is it actually does your audience a disservice. Because I know there's probably stuff coming up in people's minds where they're saying, oh, so you don't give any value. And that's not true at all. In fact, if you think about some of the greatest speeches of all time, like Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, did he give practical steps? He didn't go through practical steps. He commanded a vision. He brought people into an entire mindset shift in terms of how they would see society in their world. He didn't go through like, we need to do this step and this step and this step. So the value is not just in steps. Value is actually found in a transformation of people's minds. And so what we must do is rather than just doing steps, because you can do some steps, but rather than just doing all the how-to, we need to actually shift people's minds to get ready for a greater level of commitment to the offer or whatever it is. And so it's almost like taking off the handbrakes in people's minds. They have all these resistances of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not ready, I haven't done enough, all that sort of stuff, and all the fears that gets in their way. And if you can take those handbrakes off, get them to believe in themselves, get them to believe in the product, and get them to believe in you as the creator. Those three things create commitment to the next level.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I couldn't agree more. It's so interesting, Colin, because I feel like something fascinating happens when people shift into selling. And I think that a lot of people can serve rather naturally. It's not as scary. They can create content around serving and things like that. But there's just something in our wiring that the minute we go to sell, it's like something happens. We seize up, we get clammy, we talk faster, like all these different things. And so, can you talk to me about some of the mistakes that people make when they go to sell online? Because I think we see them all the time. And I think that people are so afraid of doing them that they don't even do anything that leads to results for them.
Yeah. Well, I think about it like this, Jenna, even for you, and the listeners, have a think about someone who has made a transformation in your life, and someone who you've actually paid them money, or you've given a significant amount of time for, or someone who has, maybe it was a book you read, maybe it was a course you did. I know for me, I think about different mentors in my life, and if I didn't have them in my life, I wouldn't have built our multi-million-dollar business. I wouldn't be living in the USA. I wouldn't be at the level that I'm at. I wouldn't have the life that I have if they hadn't of made an offer to me and essentially created a space for me to commit to myself to see a greater transformation. Now here's the kicker. The kicker is that you are that person for your audience. And so just as much as you've experienced transformations from other people's books, courses, experiences, you are that person for your audience as well. And so when we think about selling, rather than think of it as, oh, I'm just asking people to do something they don't want to do, think of it as you're holding a sacred place for the right person to enter and commit to themselves and see a transformation that they already want. And so rather than trying to think of it as the pushy, kind of car salesy, sleazy, manipulative experience, it's not that. It's this experience of going, if this is something you want to create in your life, then I'm holding a space and have created a process for you to experience that transformation faster, easier, and to be quite frank, a lot less expensive than it would be to work it out yourself. And so if you resonate with me, you resonate with the content, then I'd love to invite you into that next step. The energy is an attraction based energy rather than a pushing based energy.
I resonate with that so much, and it's so fascinating to me because there is something, and it's not like a men versus women thing, but I think women just like we've all been sold to like marketers love us, right? Whether it's wrinkle cream or this new contraption we need to keep our kids busy and not mess them up, like we are constantly being sold to. And so I think that we just have this like negative experience with feeling like targeted without feeling heard or seen. And so I love how you position it as like selling as a service because I do think it just shifts the energy and the intent. And for me, even I look at selling as like an invitation without like strings attached. Like if you RSVP no, you feel no guilt. Like that's okay. Like all I want is people to be confident in the choice that they make and not let other factors in their life make that decision for them. And so it's so interesting because shifting that relationship with selling really does allow you to serve people at a higher level, make a bigger impact, and it does like actually give you results, but it also gives the people who invest with you results. And I think that's just such a huge pivot that a lot of people need to make mentally first.
Yeah, and I think that, if you're selling online courses or you're selling coaching or even products, you have to realize that essentially you are in sales.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's more how you do that. I had just hosted an event recently and I had a lady walk up to me. Her name's Verena. And she walked and she said, Colin, I need to share something with you. And I was a little bit scared
Yep.
because I wasn't sure what she was going to say. But she started to well up in her eyes and she was like, Colin, I just wanted to say that when I came in to your kind of your world, she was like, I had this goal of hitting $100,000 months. And she was like, within 8 months, she's hit it. She went from like 20,000 to 100,000. And she was like, I just want to say, Colin, you have freaking changed my life. And I just want to let you know that I wouldn't have experienced that without building this presentation. And for me, it just reminds me of like, that's why I do what I do, is because when the right person comes into an experience with the right offer, their life can never be the same. Like they truly see a transformation. I think everyone needs to keep that in mind of that when the right person comes in contact with your offer, it's a beautiful experience of service. And in fact, it's service on the next level because if you think about it, you can only get so much results with people for free. Everyone in listening to this, I want you to think about, where do your best transformations come from? Do they come from your free content that you do on Instagram? Like, do people write and say, oh my gosh, this quote changed my life? Or does it come from your courses or your coaching and they say, oh my gosh, this changed my life, right? It's always your courses or your coaching. You get nice comments on Instagram, but it's the courses, it's the offer that truly sees people see a transformation. And so keeping that in mind, I think keeping that in the forefront when you actually make an offer on a webinar or on a live presentation or anything, it just makes you feel better about making the offer and realizing I'm not trying to get 100% conversion. That's not the goal. The goal is to find the right person and that they would join and see a transformation.
It's so interesting too, Colin, because I feel like after, I've done webinars for 9 years now, almost a decade. And I used to like be terrified of them. Like I prepared myself like I was going to war. Like food needed to be stocked up. I was going to be on all night. If the tech gods got me down, like it was intense. It was intense. And that was how I learned launching. And it did not resonate with me and my personality. And now I get so excited because when I get on there, it's so amazing to see even the shift of commentary and questions and things like that. Like serving through a presentation is getting inside the head of the person who's watching it. Like where it's almost like they're like, "Get out of my head." Like you're answering the questions I have. You're hitting the objections that I've thought. You're telling stories that I can relate to. And it's such a beautiful thing because I am so unapologetic about selling my offers at the end because for so many people, they're sitting there waiting, what is the next step? And we have this line in my business of like no dead ends. Like when you listen to a podcast episode, I don't want it to end and have you be like, okay, well, now what? Or when you get to the bottom of a blog post, I don't want you wondering, okay, well, now what? And it's like no dead ends. And so, what's so beautiful about presentations is you get to present, you get to help people start to understand things. They might not buy on that training, but guess what? 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, they might be one of your most confident buyers. And so it's recognizing that you're planting seeds, but you're also serving the people who are literally waiting for you to tell them the next step and they are ready to take the next step. And I think it's just like, I don't know, to me, it feels so awesome. Like it's awesome. It's exciting. It's fun. It's not draining. Like it's all of those things in one. It's just, I wish more people felt that way about it.
Yeah. And it's influence at scale.
Yeah.
Because rather than
Yes.
just one-to-one conversations, which are great, and sometimes you might want to do what I call a soft sell, which is you just go to a book a call, right? To book a strategy session or a clarity session. That's totally fine. But when you do it on a live presentation, whether it be a webinar, virtual event, in person, it's influence at scale. And there's something unconsciously accepted about a stage. And that is that if you are the one presenting, there is a level of authority, believability, trust, rapport that you automatically just get by being a presenter, by being someone who's presenting something. It's almost like the audience goes, if this person is confident enough to get on, to host a webinar, to get on a stage and actually talk about this stuff, then they obviously know what they're talking about. Now, obviously, you do have to know what you're talking about, but there are a lot of innate, unconscious kind of acceptances that happen in a stage. And this is why, for some people, they might think, oh, they look at you, Jenna, or they look at myself and they go, oh, you speak on stage because you guys are, market leaders in your niche. But the truth is that you just said to me, you've been running webinars for 9 years. When you first started running your webinar, did you have tens of thousands of people on there,
Oh
Jenna?
my gosh. No. No, 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 no. I was lucky if I had hundreds.
Yeah, I had like 20, right, on my
Yes.
first one, and then
Yes.
and then like 40, and then 50, right? And so the cool thing is that you start with where you're at, and then it just builds. You declare to the market by bringing that leadership on a virtual stage or a live. You declare to the market by putting a stake in the ground and saying, I'm going to influence this marketplace and be a voice. And then you move towards market leadership. It's not the other way around.
What if somebody's listening to this and they are thinking that, like, I'm not you, Colin, I'm not you, Jenna. Like, how can someone become more confident in selling, in showing up online, in doing a presentation?
First of all, you've got to realize what's going on in your mind. Like Jenna, you just mentioned that coming into webinars previously, it was like you were heading into war. Now, the interesting thing is that the war is probably mostly happening between your two ears. It's happening in your mind. And so for me, when I first started speaking, I was so nervous. I would shake so much that I would have the microphone in one hand. I would have to grab the microphone with two hands to try to stop my hands from shaking and like throwing the microphone on the audience, right? And then I'd stop my hands shaking and my leg would start to shake. And so I would have such a visceral reaction when it came to speaking. In fact, the fact that I teach it now is so odd because growing up, I didn't want anything to do with it. Like a 3-minute talk at school or at college was like a 3-hour talk in my own mind, right? There was nothing worse that I could think of doing. And so, but what I realized is that once you master your mind, you've mastered like 80% of the game. And so mastering your mind comes into this idea of being extremely conscious of what your questions are coming into the presentation and what your thoughts are coming into a presentation. Let's say someone listening, they want to run a webinar in like a month or so. What's going to happen is your brain is going to work extremely hard to keep you exactly the way you are and not get you to step outside of your comfort zone. So it's going to ask you questions like, but what if you mess up? What if people don't think your content's good enough? What if the tech messes up? Like all of these things will come in, right? We all have this fear of not being enough, a fear of not feeling connected. We all have these fears. We have a fear of not being loved. And the problem is that when you step on any stage, there is a vulnerability that needs to be brought to the stage because you're essentially you're in front of a group of people. And so asking yourself better questions is really important. So rather than asking a question like, what if I forget what I'm going to say? You ask a question like, what if this content truly impacts people's lives? Or a question like, what am I grateful for about this opportunity to share what I love? Or it could be, what if the only goal was to impact just at least one person? And all of a sudden, you even just the energy of those questions, I even notice in you, Jenna, like there's just a different resonance, right? And so what's great is coming into a presentation is asking better questions. The second thing is declaring more powerful statements over yourself. One of the things that I used to tell myself before I understood this was that I used to actually say, I thought I was an idiot. Can I be honest, Jenna? I mean, I'm always being honest, but it's like that's true at a deeper level. I used to believe that I was an idiot. And the problem with that is anytime I was put in a high stakes situation, I would look for evidence that I was an idiot. Now, do you know when I learned that? I learned it when I was 13. I was in school reading a passage from the Bible in Catholic school, and I started to stutter and I couldn't get through the paragraph and I stopped halfway and then we had to go on to the next kid. And I remember walking out feeling like, what is wrong with me? I'm 13, 14 years old. I can't even read. There must be something wrong with me. I'm an idiot. And I actually believed that about myself until I was about 24 when I understood personal development, how you can change your thoughts, how you can change your feelings, and how you can change your actions. And that's when I started working on my thoughts. But my first thought about myself was that I was an idiot. And that's how I showed up in the world. And so I changed it to I'm a proactive, enthusiastic, intelligent individual. That was my first like declarative statement about myself. I'm a proactive, enthusiastic, intelligent individual. It's a bit of a mouthful. But that was my first one. Then I went on to go, you know what? I'm a transformational coach. I'm a world-class speaker. When I step on stage, I freaking rock. And I started to like tell this about myself. And what happens is like when you say stuff about yourself, you start noticing it. When you start noticing it more, you start gathering more evidence, then you start feeling more confident, and then you show up differently. And then your world starts to shift and change. And so I think your mind is a big part. And then obviously there's the practice. So I think people should practice it between 5 to 10 times out loud, at least before they do the presentation. That makes a big difference as well, obviously.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the intention behind it is so powerful. And I think, there's so many like formulas out there. There's so many strategies and frameworks and things, but like your intention is rooted in everything, in how you show up, in how it is perceived, in how it is experienced. So I just think that's so powerful. It was so interesting, Colin, because watching my friend, the one who I gave the 10-minute voice memo to, she did 4 trainings in like 2 days.
Right.
And I watched every single one of them. And she was like, "Don't you have better things to do?" And I'm like, "No." And she got better and better
Yeah.
and better and better. And by that last one, I was like, "Holy cow, like you are on fire." And I think a lot of times people stop at 1 and they don't do it again. And you learn like my first one of every live series is usually my worst one. I'm flubbing, the flow's off. I notice a typo on a slide, like all these different things. And it's like, man, like make sure you do it multiple times. You get better every single time. And it was just so cool. I was telling Drew, I'm like, in a 24-hour time period, I watched her transform, but also this presentation transform. And it was just, it was awesome because I think so many people are so quick to throw in the towel and they're like, this didn't work. Didn't work for me. I did what you said. It didn't work. And it's like, you got to put in the reps. You got to put in the reps. Like I have done in 9 years, I've done hundreds of webinars. Like, so I think it's so powerful.
Yeah. Well, can I speak to that? My first like kind of live webinar that I ran, this was many years ago. This is where I had an online course and it taught productivity. I actually had a productivity program. And I got really excited about it because I ended up having, this was back in the day when with Facebook where you could just do whatever you want, right? This is like the Wild West. and I'm DMing people. I'm breaking every single Facebook rule there is. I ended up getting 600 people to sign up for the presentation series. And I did it, and I'm doing the numbers. I'm thinking, gosh, I was selling like $1,000 product. I'm like, I'm going to do like maybe 50,000. No, I reckon I might even do like 200,000, maybe 300. Like I'm doing all that, right? I'm like making up these numbers, right, in my mind. And I'm like, and oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to like speak to 600 people. It's going to grow everything. I did the presentation. One person bought, and I was absolutely devastated. I was like, this is stupid. This thing doesn't work. What's the point of this? I was like absolutely devastated because I'd spent about $5,000 developing the online course. It was my first online course. I knew that there were people who were doing it, but I just didn't know how. So that was when I got obsessed about what's the difference between this presentation I did and the ones that would actually make sales. And so that's when I studied content. I studied how people present, how to influence people from a stage. To be honest, a lot of the stuff I studied, I didn't love because I felt like it was very kind of bro marketing. By the way, like 72% of my audience is women. So I was just like, I don't want that kind of bro style. I wanted something that was more irresistible, attractive kind of style. And so I developed my own structures. And what happened was the first time I ran the webinar again, I only had, like 100 people sign up, but we did about $6,000. And I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. And then I refined the webinar again. We ran it like 2 months later and I did like $12,000. And then refined it again. Then we did like 50,000 and then we started doing $100,000 presentations. The crazy thing is that within about 2.5 years, I'd done about $2.3 million of this course that I couldn't sell at the start. And what I realized was there was nothing wrong with my course. I was like, my course is actually really good. What was wrong was how I was articulating the value of the course and the process I was taking people through in the presentation. And so what was cool was that webinar, I ended up doing, essentially it became the same webinar over and over again to just bigger and bigger audiences. But the start of it was designing that one webinar, that one presentation that I could deploy on a live stage, because I did a lot of live presentations with it as well. And then also I used to run like a monthly webinar with it. And that changed my life when I designed that one webinar.
I think you just made such a good point that a lot of times we put so much time and energy and money into the offer, right? And I believe, especially in my community, people are putting out good content, like life-changing content, like things that will change people's lives. And if we don't learn how to sell it, a lot of times we'll just point the finger and say, well, it must be the wrong offer. And most of the time I will argue it's not the wrong offer. Like your offer is amazing. Like you put your heart and your soul and your expertise and your intention into it. It is that you do not know how to sell the offer. And so it's so interesting to me because I think a lot of people will invest in like the development of the thing, but you don't realize that if you don't learn how to sell the thing, you're never going to get the outcomes that you imagine. The reason why you started this for other people, you're never going to get the impact, and you're also not going to get the income. It's so interesting, isn't it? That is like where that disconnect is. If we go back to the thought patterns, that we believe that like we built the wrong thing or like that the offer isn't valuable. And that's not the case usually.
Usually it's not the case. Usually your offer is good enough. It's actually, and when I say your offer, I do want to say that your course and your offer are separate, because your course is essentially the process that people go through, all the coaching experience, whatever it is. But the offer is actually how you articulate the course. So there's even nuances on the offer itself, like the transformation, the name of the product, the way you describe the modules, the outcomes of the modules, how you articulate the social proof. Like these are all elements of the offer. And what I also realized was that my course was great, but I didn't know how to articulate the offer itself. And so understanding that if you design an irresistible offer, which is the skin around the course or the coaching experience, and then design the presentation that leads to the conversion, like you've got a money-making machine, you've got an impact-making machine, you've got something that can truly scale what you want to do to the moon.
I am so nerdy. Like I love this stuff. Like give me this slide by slide. Like I remember going on a walk with Drew one time, and it was before we had kids, and we would put in earbuds and we'd walk side by side, and he'd be listening to like music or like a podcast. He'd be like, "What are you listening to?" And I'm like, "Webinars." Like I love and I would just sit there and dissect every piece of it because I think it's so fascinating. But the good news is that for all the people who are listening to this who are like, I am not you, I would not choose to listen to a webinar on a walk. There is a system, and it's one that you don't have to figure out on your own. And it is so repeatable, and it spans industries. And it was just so cool when I was watching my friend last week because she's in a whole different industry than I am. I'm not an expert in what she's an expert in. And yet I was able to just see all these small tweaks that would totally change the outcome in the belief in the person watching it. And so the good news is if you're listening to this, you're like, where the heck do I begin? How do I do this? You don't have to do it on your own. Colin, talk to us about this training that you have coming up, because let me tell you, Goal Diggers, real quick. Colin was on the show a year ago, and it was one of our best episodes we've ever had. So many people were so obsessed with what Colin teaches. And so I just want to like seed this with like, this is gold. So tell us what we can learn from you.
Yeah, so I'm hosting an in-depth masterclass. Essentially, it's called how to sell on webinars and live presentations. And so essentially, the masterclass is the psychology of feeling confident to sell, and then also the practicality of structuring the presentation so that you actually end up getting clients rather than just nice comments and claps. That's essentially the outcome of it. Now, specifically, I'm going to be going deep into the type of stories. We haven't even had a chance in this conversation to go deep into stories. Like stories are such a big part of selling without selling. So I'm going to unpack the types of stories you should be telling, how the overall structure of the presentation looks, how to go from like how-to content to decision-based content. I mean, for me, my goal is for everyone, no matter what, they'll walk away feeling clearer, more confident, really excited about building that one presentation that could truly change their life forever. And so that's the goal of it. And so whether you want to do virtual presentations on webinars or you want to speak on live stages, it's completely applicable.
So excited. Go to jennakutcher.com/stage. And I've just got to give you a shout out, Colin. Like, I love what you do and how you teach it. And let me just tell you guys, like, I get Colin's strategies. I am someone who will like study what he says and implement what he does. Like if that man is in my messages shooting me something during a webinar, you better believe I am paying attention and I am implementing before the next one. And so I just think that how you structure it is so grace-filled and so exciting and so easy that it's like everyone, if you struggle with selling, this is going to be so transformative to just the way that you look at it, but also like the way you embody your message and your mission. And I love what you do, Colin.
Well, I appreciate you, Jenna, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help more people. Like when I got into this, my goal at the end of my life is to look back and go, I created a space for people to experience more of the potential than they could have ever experienced in their life. That for me is my goal, is that no matter what, people would feel like they truly walked in their potential. And I was a part of that journey, that part of that story in opening that space. And so I know that no matter what, when people turn up, they experience the training, they're going to walk away with some really cool stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, also like reverse engineering things is like my favorite thing in the world. So if you want to learn how to sell, go on to something like this and watch how it's done.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. jennakutcher.com/stage. Colin, thanks for coming back on the Gold Digger podcast. I'm sure this won't be the last time we hear from you, but we so appreciate your voice.
Thanks, Jenna.
I have got to say that Colin's work has just transformed how I feel about selling, and it has changed the way that I show up when I sell. I am obsessed with how he teaches, and I love how he empowers us to really lean into our stories. That's something he's going to get into on his training. And that little piece alone totally shifts your entire presentation. So save your seat for it, jennakutcher.com/stage. That's jennakutcher.com/stage. I cannot wait for you to learn from Colin so that you can get your offer out into the world for the people that you created it for, so that they can get the most impact and so that you can get an income doing what you love. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Goal Digger Podcast. Until next time, keep on digging your biggest goals.